In this video, I want to discuss three drawing principles that have really helped me better understand drawing animals, drawing in general, but especially when you want to draw animals. I think these are three massively helpful principles that simplify the process of drawing animals in general. And yes, form is going to be one of them, but we're not going to start with that. We're actually going to start with fur. And the reason I say this is because I struggle with this a lot, and it helped me a lot in my professional career as well to just simplify the concept of fur, especially when we talk about hair, fur, or any other texture. We tend to overcomplicate things. And one of the things that has really helped me is taking it step by step. So, one of those things is just first think about the silhouette. And to illustrate that a little bit, if we look at these shapes right now, they seem like kind of meaningless, but that's the same when we want to draw an animal. And let's say, like, this is the animal, right? This blob right here. Now, the first thing that we see as humans is not all of the internal detail of the animal. So there can be a lot of texture in here. So let's say there's like furry texture in here, right? Now, that can all be true, but that's not what catches our eye first. What we actually pay attention to first is the silhouette. So we are actually very prone to seeing silhouettes. And so when we want to suggest fur, which is also something we can suggest with the silhouette, we want that to break out from certain parts of the silhouette. And the hardest part here for a lot of us is actually randomizing that and designing that. And that's where a lot of beginners kind of tend to trip up, is that when they go and draw fur, they sort of do this, like what you tend to do with hair in the beginning as well, or with grass, like all of the same repeating patterns. And that's something that you want to avoid because, one, it will give a very noisy look, and two, it will not feel as believable as if you actually clump everything together like you would do with hair. So instead, what we do with fur is, like, we tend to sort of break the silhouette. That's the first thing we do. And we do it with these well designed, or at least we try to design them as best as we can, clumps of triangles. And now the important part is that we also randomize a bit how it clumps together. And the reason for that is because otherwise it's not going to look natural. So if I, on this other side, right, if I do this repeating pattern all the time, it's just not going to feel natural. It's going to feel man-made because that's what we do, you know? We as humans tend to go for always these very structured kind of things. Look at buildings, right? When we have buildings, like, there's also always a lot of symmetry in buildings. And that's something we actually don't want in nature. Or when we want to mimic nature, we want to avoid that kind of design. So in this case, we try to randomize in a lot of different ways the way that we represent that fur. And if we do that, we can end up with something that looks a lot more natural. So if you look at the solutions here provided by Arne, you can see that by breaking that silhouette, we already create a lot more of an organic look that mimics fur. Now, it still looks very stylized and it still looks very cartoony. That is normal. And that is because we're just at step one. I do like the process of first doing the silhouette and then only looking internally and how we can add more believability, because it's the same with rendering. Is we start with indicating form, and we usually do that in the shadows, and then we go and add more form indication in the halftones, right? And I like to think about drawing fur in the exact same way. So when we then continue, what we then want to do is we want to add three-dimensionality to the fur. Now, this is the exact same as with hair, is that, again, we don't want to do all of this noisy fur, again, with similar design everywhere. Because, again, it's going to look very noisy and it's not going to look believable. And in order to explain that a little bit better, I want you to think again about a simple cylinder. So when we have a simple cylinder like this, and we want to add form to that cylinder, what you do is you actually don't do this, right? Now, the irony is when a lot of you go to draw hair or fur or any kind of texture, you actually do this exact thing, right? And that is not what we want. So what we tend to see, especially if we add some believability to drawing or painting, is that we tend to stay out of the areas of light. So let's say if the light is going to be hit here, I'm going to add texture here on the sides, and then I'm going to also sparingly space out my lines a little bit more, because remember, those lines are curving around, right? Like this. So the more I get to the edges, the closer they're going to be together, just because the way that we look at things. And by doing that, we add more volume and believability to the cylinder. Well, the third thing works the exact same way. The only thing we need to keep in mind, and this is again where we need a bit of our understanding of form, is where we have our volume lines and where we have the flow of the fur. So in this case, right, and we saw this in the previous example, right, we want to follow that flow of our fur. This just has to do with the way that hair kind of naturally follows an exact form, right? It follows the curvature of the shoulders or the neck or whatever it is. And we want to keep that in mind. So we want to keep that volume in mind. But we can actually treat it very similar to how we treat a cylinder. So if I'm going to pick this color again, right, and I have this flow of my fur, I don't even need to draw these clumps right now, right? I can if I want to be fancy about it, but what I can do is just actually start indicating some form in these particular areas. Again, trying to avoid my light and add more on the sides. Then when I go to the middle, I'm a bit more sparse with these indications. And you can see that by doing that, and if I keep the volume of my fur in mind, that we can really get some nice and believable looks in this fur. So you can see as well, like this beautiful example by Arne, is that we're really thinking about that volume and how to add this indication of 3D or three-dimensionality by thinking of that cylinder concept. And then when we apply that to the actual wolf head, that you can see that we're doing all of those principles, just those two principles. We're thinking about where do we break up the silhouette, and then thinking about the simplicity of our volume, where is the light going to be hitting, and how do we then indicate the volume of that simple form. And that's the only place where we indicate it. And by doing that, we create this very nice, natural feeling to fur. Instead of really not knowing what you're doing and just trying to scribble fur or doing all of these triangles because you saw that online, it creates a very noisy look. So that's the first thing that I would definitely recommend that you do and try. Now, before you do anything else, make sure that you click the link in the description and get our free ebook. This book is absolutely fantastic. It gives you an insight into primarily what you'll be learning in our ArtWad Beginner Road and applying, and it will give you these aha moments into how we at ArtWad make you intuitive at perspective and how we really help you better to draw from imagination in a very approachable manner, especially our staple unique approach to form manipulation that you won't learn anywhere else on how to really look at form, how to be able to manipulate form that then turns into actual believable things that you can draw from imagination. We sort of want to unveil some of the secrets we have at ArtWad on how to better get people into learning to draw from imagination. That's what this book is for. That will naturally kind of give you a hunger to do more, as it should, because drawing is awesome, especially when you can do it from imagination. Click the link in the description, get this book. It's truly awesome, and it's free. And then number 2 is the simplicity of color. And this is something I absolutely love because I'm always, and a lot of professional artists, by the way, they're always trying to find ways to make it as simple as possible, to make the process as simple as possible. So in this case, coloring animals is no different. A lot of the times when we look at reference, we get overstimulated by all of the colors available. And yes, there are a lot of colors present in animals, but that doesn't mean that we need to paint all of them. The best way actually is to think about like two base colors that we want to use and then maybe an accent color. I'm not saying this is the case for all of the animals all of the time, but for you as the artist, if you want to simplify your process and actually enjoy it a little bit more as well, because for me, it became a lot more enjoyable when I was able to simplify the complexity of everything. So the texture, fur, things like that, but also color, because I'm not a hero with color. And I need sort of this template of I'm going to use color sparingly, so two base colors, and then you can use an accent color. And that has worked wonders for me. And you can see these examples here as well from Arne, is that we can really, with two colors, we can already do a lot. So I would recommend that you also experiment with that. And the cool thing about this as well is that it makes you more creative as well. So if you want to like draw a certain, wolf or, something, you can already apply this thinking. And if you want to add some interest to the color, you could, of course, add some like color variety in the same like sort of color range, right? You can always add a bit of interest by staying fairly close to your base colors, let's say. And you can introduce some grays if you want to. Right, so I'm going over this quickly, but then you can add your other base color, right? So in this case, it would be a lighter color. And then the main thing I would recommend that you do, which I'm not doing right now, which I should be doing, is try to at first define the edges of those colors as best as you can. So don't try to keep those edges too soft, because again, you might create like muddy colors or something, which is not something you necessarily want. So in the beginning, I would say try to define your color areas as best as you can. And you can take your time with this, right? You don't have to rush through it like I'm doing here. I'm just doing this for the sake of the video, because otherwise we're going to be here for a long time, and I keep adjusting colors all the time, so it's not the best that you're watching me do this right now. All right, let's quickly add in the snout color. And then to make things interesting, we basically just choose an accent color, right? I'm going to choose something probably fairly unrealistic in this case, right? But it's just like a certain area where we want to pull attention. That's it. So it doesn't have to be anything fancy, but it makes us, or it helps us. This is what we do in design a lot of the times as well. You'll see this even in mechanical design and all of that. There's always like this one little accent color that makes everything pop or just adds to the design and makes the design overall more interesting, because if you only have two base colors, then things can look fairly monotone pretty quickly. And so in order to avoid that, we usually add like this accent color. But overall, so we can go extremely crazy with all these colors, and we can vary it up, and you can vary up the design. But as you can see, what Arne did here as well is like he defined the edges of the colors really well, and so you can spend your time with that. But he's only using two colors and then an accent color, and there is some like color dynamics in the local colors themselves that make it more interesting. But overall is two base colors, or sometimes even just one base color and an accent color. And you can already make everything super interesting by just doing that. And I feel like a lot of the times we are overwhelmed with color options, especially in the digital age, where we start to have this analysis paralysis and we end up with a lot of muddy colors. So if you want to make your animals just look better from the start, especially when you're starting out, then I would say limit your colors as best as you can. And then lastly, and this is something I swear by, and this is something that has helped me massively as well, when it just comes to learning how to pose animals correctly in space. It's, of course, again, thinking about simple form as we do always. That's just, that's what we love. We love form, but also we want to do it in this animation style, these what I call advanced mannequins. So we also use like an advanced mannequin for the figure itself, where it's basically just a 2D shirt and a 2D pants, but there's like a box for a head. Now, the reason this is very interesting is because we have like one or two elements that can help us orient in space. So we have this building block where we can draw the mannequin in different angles, because if we just use 2D, it's very hard to create things in different perspectives, and therefore we're not really training our perspective, and we're not really training our intuition in perspective. So by having this sort of, in animation they use this a lot as well, basically this sort of advanced skeleton of an animal in this case, or you can do it for the figure as well, is that you massively simplify the proportions, but you can really train the proportions of the animal you wish to learn. And so when you go and learn it, by all means, start with tracing. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. You just want to make sure that you do tracing for the right reasons. So in this case, because I'm looking at a very complex animal, the wolf, what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to find that advanced mannequin. Like, can I find that shoulder girdle? Can I then also add just that simplicity, just that stick figure, basically, those sticks for the paws and the legs? And can I find the same thing for the hip? We're basically trying to x-ray the wolf, right? And doing this will really, really help you better understand how to pose animals in different perspectives. And then lastly, when we have that skeleton, we want to add some complexity. And this is where things get really interesting, because what we're doing here is basically form manipulation, right? The form manipulation will really help us fit everything together and make the simple look complex. But we now are doing it on a wireframe that we already accurately understand. So you want to do that wireframe, that advanced skeleton, you want to practice that for a good amount of time so that you become intuitive in where you can draw it, and you can draw it in different, in many different ways and many different perspectives. And then you're just literally filling the gaps. So you're filling the gaps with more complex form. And this is where it gets really interesting, because you can now see that you can really start to train your eye for finding these more complicated forms in space. And when you do that, like the posing of an animal also becomes easier, because you're no longer thinking of all of the like outer complexity of what that posing is. You're starting to think about the internal works of an animal. You're literally looking at it as puzzle pieces. And it can really help you as well with your spatial awareness, because I think it's one of the best things to have is spatial awareness as an artist, because then it's easier for you to foreshorten things and to build things from imagination. So whatever you want to build something yourself, it becomes easier. And whenever you do this, also try to indicate sort of the contour lines of the more complex forms that you're drawing, so that you can really see the volume. And you'll start to also like train your foreshortening and your form complexity. And so everything becomes easier because you take it in this step-by-step approach. And so if you repeat this process for the legs, which is the exact same process of just simplifying it and adding complexity on top, you really have nice building blocks to draw your animal. In this case, it's a wolf, but you can do it on any animal. And by first taking like a step back and thinking about how can I really, really just simplify this as much as I can to really understand first the proportions, because especially when you want to draw animals, it's the same thing with drawing anything that is very familiar for us, like the face, for instance, or figures, is we intuitively know when it looks off. And that's why it feels very scary to draw things like wolves or dogs or cats, because when it looks off, we know it looks off. And the reason that is usually is because of proportions. And so when you first start with just building these simple building blocks of like a mannequin, basically, but even like just a skeleton, like a skeletal mannequin, you can really fail a lot. You can fail a lot until it looks right. Once it looks right, though, is just about adding volume. And adding the volume is the easy part. And because you now add volume on top of a right structure with correct proportions, it will look correct very fast. And then it's just about adding that fur that we talked about in the beginning of this video and also adding some color. And you'll be well on your way to making something look very cool very fast. All right? I hope that helped. As always, stay creative, happy drawing, and I'll see you in the next one.